In 1933, at the height of the Great Depression, a family in Detroit grew more food in their backyard than 90% of American suburban families grow today. They had no irrigation system, no chemical fertilizer, no seed subscription, no app telling them when to water. They had dirt, scraps, and knowledge that their grandparents carried from the old country. That single backyard produced over 800 pounds of vegetables in one season. It was exposed to the same sun, the same rain, the same soil as the house next door today, which grows nothing but lawn. Between 1930 and 1945, more than 20 million American families turned their yards into food production. At the peak, home gardens produced 40% of all vegetables consumed in the United States. 40%. Not from industrial farms, not from refrigerated trucks crossing the country, from backyards, vacant lots, and rooftops, from soil that Americans had learned to feed instead of deplete. Then, over the next 50 years, that knowledge almost completely disappeared. Not because it stopped working, not because science disproved it, but because a $200 billion industry needed you to forget that soil can feed itself. They needed you to believe that fertility comes in bags, that harvest requires purchase, that the ground beneath your feet is dead unless you buy what they sell. This is the story of Depression-era soil secrets, the methods that tripled harvests without a single dollar spent on inputs, and the 90-year campaign to make sure you never learned them. The record opens in the spring of 1931 in vacant lots across American cities. The economy had collapsed. Banks had failed. Unemployment had reached 25%. Families who had worked factory jobs for decades suddenly had no income, no savings, and no way to feed their children. But they had land. Abandoned lots, unused corners of parks, strips of dirt between tenements. And they had memory. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration recognized something that modern policy has forgotten. When people cannot buy food, they can grow it, but only if they know how. In 1933, the agency began funding what they called relief gardens. Some cities called them welfare gardens or subsistence gardens. The names varied. The purpose did not. Transform unemployed workers into food producers. Transform dead urban soil into living systems. In Detroit alone, the city mapped over 40,000 vacant lots and offered them to families for free. Thayer Street Garden became one of the most productive urban farms in American history. Families who had never grown a tomato in their lives were suddenly feeding themselves from April through October. The program spread. Chicago, New York, Cleveland, Philadelphia. By 1934, relief garden programs operated in every major American city. But the gardens worked only because the soil worked. And the soil worked only because the gardeners remembered something. Fertility is not purchased, it is built. Agricultural bulletins from 1932 called compost the poor man's fertilizer. Extension agents taught families to dig pits behind their houses, to layer kitchen scraps with dried leaves, and to turn the pile every few weeks. Within 60 days, that pile became black gold. It was humus so rich it smelled like the forest floor. Gardeners spread it an inch thick over their plots each spring. They did not buy nitrogen. They did not buy phosphorus. They did not buy potassium. They built all three from materials that cost nothing. The science behind this was not new. European farmers had composted for centuries. Asian rice paddies had cycled organic matter for millennia. But in Depression-era America, composting became survival technology. A family with a compost pile could grow twice the harvest of a family without one. The difference was not luck. It was biology. When you add compost to soil, you are not just adding nutrients. You are adding life. 1 teaspoon of healthy compost contains more than 1 billion bacteria, several yards of fungal threads, thousands of protozoa, and dozens of nematodes. These organisms do not just sit in the soil. They work. Bacteria break down organic matter and release nitrogen in forms that plant roots can absorb. Fungi extend root systems by a factor of 10, reaching water and minerals that roots alone could never find. Protozoa eat bacteria and excrete nitrogen in plant-available form. The entire system cycles nutrients continuously, without any input from the gardener after the initial addition. Depression-era families did not have microscopes. They did not know the names of soil bacteria, but they knew the results. Plots fed with compost produced more. Plots fed with compost survived drought better. Plots fed with compost resisted disease. The evidence was in the harvest, and the harvest did not lie. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration documented these results systematically. Garden supervisors in city after city reported the same pattern. Families who composted outproduced families who did not by margins of 50%. Sometimes 100%, sometimes more. One report from Cleveland noted that demonstration plots using only compost yielded 3 times the vegetables of adjacent plots using no amendments at all. 3 times. That number appears again and again in the records, not because it was propaganda, because it was true. But composting was only one piece of the system. Depression-era gardeners understood something else that modern agriculture has systematically forgotten. The harvest does not end when you pick the vegetable. It ends when winter does. And without refrigeration, without canning equipment, without freezers, how do you keep food from September to April? The answer had been standing in American backyards for 300 years. Root cellars. A root cellar is nothing more than a hole in the ground with a roof. It uses the Earth's stable temperature, typically between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit at depth, to create natural cold storage. No electricity, no machinery, just physics. Before the rural electrification programs of the 1930s, most American farms had no access to refrigeration. Yet families ate vegetables through the winter. The root cellar made it possible. Depression-era families knew exactly which crops stored best. Potatoes could last 6 months in a properly managed cellar. Carrots buried in sand lasted 4 months. Beets, turnips, parsnips, and rutabagas all survived the winter underground. Cabbages wrapped in newspaper kept until March. Onions braided and hung from the ceiling lasted until spring planting. The Woodstock History Center documented that root cellars experienced a major revival during the Great Depression and World War II. Families who had abandoned the old ways suddenly remembered them. The Farm Security Administration actively encouraged root cellar construction. Extension bulletins explained proper ventilation, humidity control, and storage techniques. A family with a root cellar and a productive garden could eat fresh vegetables 12 months a year without spending $1 on groceries. But root cellars required a specific kind of gardening. You could not store hybrid tomatoes. You could not store lettuce. You could not store most of the crops that modern seed catalogs emphasize. You had to grow for storage. That meant root vegetables. That meant winter squash. That meant cabbages and onions. Depression-era gardens looked nothing like modern suburban gardens. They were designed for survival, not salads. This is a detail that matters. When families grew for storage, they selected varieties that had been bred for keeping quality over centuries. These were not the tender, sweet, quick-maturing varieties that modern breeders favor. These were tough, dense, sometimes homely vegetables that could sit in a cold cellar for months without rotting. They were survivors, and the families who grew them became survivors too. The gardeners also saved seed. This practice seems obvious until you realize how completely it has vanished. Today, most American gardeners buy new seed every spring. They do so without questioning why. Depression-era families would have found this incomprehensible. Seed was not a product. Seed was inheritance. When you save seed from your own garden, you are not just preserving genetics. You are adapting. Every generation of seed saved from your plot becomes slightly better suited to your soil, your climate, your microenvironment. Tomatoes saved for 10 generations from the same garden will outperform store-bought seed in that specific garden. The plant learns. The gardener teaches by selection. Depression-era families understood this intuitively. They saved seed from their best plants. They traded seed with neighbors. They formed what modern researchers now call seed-saving circles, informal networks of gardeners exchanging genetic material and knowledge. A family in Ohio might trade bean seed with a cousin in Pennsylvania. Both families benefited from the other's selections. Both families strengthened their local food security. The Seed Savers Exchange, founded in 1975, documented this history extensively. The founders began their work after receiving seeds that had been carried from Bavaria in the 1870s and passed down through 4 generations of an Iowa farm family. Those seeds had survived 100 years of American agriculture, not because they were commercially valuable, but because they were irreplaceable. When Diane Ott Wheely's grandfather gave her those seeds on his deathbed, he was not giving her a product. He was giving her survival. During the Depression, this kind of inheritance was common. Families guarded their best seed varieties the way they guarded land deeds. A good strain of pole bean or winter squash was wealth. It could not be repossessed. It could not be inflated away. It could not be taxed. It just kept producing, year after year, asking nothing but sun and water and someone to save the seed. Now, let us talk about the fields. Not backyard gardens, but the farms. Because the same years that saw urban families turn vacant lots into vegetable plots also saw rural America face the greatest agricultural catastrophe in its history, the Dust Bowl. Between 1930 and 1940, severe drought, combined with decades of poor farming practices, turned the Great Plains into a wasteland. Topsoil that had accumulated over 10,000 years blew away in massive dust storms. Black blizzards darkened skies from Texas to Chicago. Farms that had produced abundant wheat for generations became barren hardpan. Families abandoned their land by the hundreds of thousands. But not all farms failed. Some farmers had adopted different methods, and those methods made all the difference. The practices that saved farms during the Dust Bowl have names that sound technical. Strip fallow, contour plowing, stubble mulching, windbreak planting. But the principles beneath them are simple. Do not leave soil bare. Do not remove all organic matter. Do not break the structure that holds earth in place. Strip fallow meant alternating planted strips with fallow strips, so that bare ground was always protected by adjacent vegetation. Contour plowing meant following the natural curves of the land instead of plowing straight rows so that water infiltrated instead of running off. Stubble mulching meant leaving crop residue on the surface instead of plowing it under so that the ground stayed covered through winter. Windbreak planting meant establishing rows of trees to slow wind and trap moisture. A working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research examined these practices in detail. Researchers found that farms using strip fallow and stubble mulching retained significantly more soil moisture than farms using conventional methods. During drought years, this moisture retention translated directly into yield differences. Farms that kept organic matter on the surface produced crops. Farms that plowed it under produced dust. By 1938, the Soil Conservation Service reported that combined conservation practices had reduced blowing soil by 65% across participating farms. 65%. In regions where neighbors were abandoning their land entirely, farms using these methods survived. The NBER research also documented something more subtle. Farms with higher organic matter in their soil resisted drought better across all conditions. Organic matter acts like a sponge, absorbing water when it rains and releasing it slowly to plant roots during dry periods. A soil with 5% organic matter can hold roughly twice as much water as a soil with 2% organic matter. During the Dust Bowl, that difference determined whether a farm survived or blew away. This was not new science. Farmers had known for centuries that adding manure, compost, and crop residues improved soil. But the cheap availability of synthetic fertilizer in the early 20th century had led many farmers to abandon these practices. Why bother building soil when you could just add chemicals? The Dust Bowl answered that question brutally. You bother because chemicals cannot hold soil together. Only organic matter can. So what happened? Why did these methods not become the foundation of American agriculture? Why did 20 million relief gardens vanish? Why did root cellars become curiosities? Why did seed saving become a fringe hobby instead of common practice? Why did the soil building techniques that saved Dust Bowl farms become footnotes instead of standards? The answer begins with a German chemist and a process that may have saved 1 billion lives while simultaneously destroying the foundation of sustainable agriculture. In 1909, Fritz Haber demonstrated that nitrogen could be synthesized from air using high pressure and a catalyst. The Haber-Bosch process, later scaled up by Carl Bosch, made industrial production of ammonia possible for the first time. Before that invention, all nitrogen fertilizer came from organic sources: manure, compost, guano, and legume rotation. After the invention, nitrogen could be manufactured in factories. The immediate application was explosives. World War I consumed unprecedented quantities of ammunition, and the Haber-Bosch process made Germany's munitions independence possible. But after the war, those same factories needed new markets. They found them in agriculture. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer hit American farms in earnest during the 1920s. At first, it supplemented organic methods. Farmers used chemical nitrogen alongside manure and compost. But over time, a shift occurred. Why maintain a compost pile when you could spread granules from a bag? Why manage a rotation when you could just add more nitrogen? The chemical approach was simpler, faster, and seemed to work just as well. After World War II, the shift accelerated dramatically. Munitions factories again needed peacetime markets. The same ammonium nitrate used in bombs became the foundation of agricultural fertility. The price dropped. Availability exploded. Extension services, increasingly funded by chemical companies, began teaching farmers that synthetic fertilizer was not just an option, but a necessity. Here is the logic that drove the transition. Compost is free. You make it from waste materials that would otherwise rot in a pile. A farmer who masters composting never needs to buy fertility again. That farmer is self-sufficient. That farmer represents $0 of recurring revenue. Synthetic fertilizer is purchased every season, every year, forever. A farmer dependent on synthetic fertilizer represents guaranteed income. Multiply that by millions of farms, and you have a $200 billion global industry. An industry that cannot exist if farmers remember how to build soil themselves. The fertilizer industry did not conspire in smoky rooms to suppress composting knowledge. They did not need to. They simply invested. They funded university research. They sponsored extension programs. They provided curriculum materials to agricultural schools. They bought advertising in farm journals. And slowly, steadily, over decades, the message shifted. The new message said, fertility comes in bags. The new message said, soil is just a medium to hold roots while chemicals do the real work. The new message said, modern farming means purchased inputs. The old knowledge, the Depression-era knowledge, the knowledge that soil could feed itself if you fed it first, became quaint. Then obsolete. Then forgotten. The campaign to erase soil wisdom operated on multiple fronts simultaneously. First, the seed industry transformed. Before the 1930s, most farmers saved their own seed. By 1960, hybrid corn dominated American agriculture. Hybrid seeds produce excellent first-generation crops, but do not breed true. Save seed from a hybrid, and next year's crop will be inferior, variable, unpredictable. To get consistent results, you must buy new hybrid seed every year. This was presented as progress. Hybrid vigor increased yields. That part was true. But hybrid dependence also broke the cycle of seed saving that had sustained agriculture for 10,000 years. Farmers who once selected their own seed became customers who returned every spring, checkbook in hand. Second, the extension service shifted focus. Land-grant universities, established to serve farmers, increasingly served the industries that funded their research. Studies on organic soil management declined. Studies on chemical optimization multiplied. A young farmer attending extension meetings in 1955 heard about nitrogen application rates, not compost ratios, about herbicide timing, not mulching techniques, about the latest hybrid varieties, not seed saving. Third, the infrastructure changed. Small-scale food preservation equipment became hard to find. Local seed exchanges faded. Root cellar construction knowledge passed out of common practice. Farmers' markets, once central to local food economies, were displaced by supermarket chains with national supply networks. The entire system that had supported Depression-era self-sufficiency was dismantled piece by piece. None of this required conspiracy. It only required economics. Every step that increased farmer dependence increased corporate revenue. Every step that preserved farmer independence threatened corporate revenue. The system selected for dependence the way evolution selects for survival, not through intent, but through pressure. By 1980, the transformation was nearly complete. Most American farmers had never made compost. Most had never saved seed. Most had never seen a root cellar in use. Most believed, because they had been taught to believe, that modern agriculture required modern inputs, that high yields demanded high purchases, that the old ways were not just outdated but impossible. The results of this transformation are now visible across American farmland. Start with the soil. In 1930, American topsoil averaged approximately 12 inches deep across the Midwest. Today, that average has dropped to 6 inches. Half the topsoil is gone, washed into rivers, blown into the atmosphere, hauled away by erosion that organic matter would have prevented. The USDA estimates that American farmland loses nearly 2 billion tons of topsoil each year. Billion with a B. Topsoil that accumulated over thousands of years, lost in decades. And what replaces it? Nothing. You cannot manufacture topsoil in a factory. You cannot buy it by the truckload. It builds only through the slow accumulation of organic matter, the same process that Depression-era farmers understood intuitively. Next, consider the carbon. Healthy soil stores enormous quantities of carbon in organic matter. When you plow soil and leave it bare, That carbon oxidizes into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. American farmland has released approximately 50% of its stored carbon since industrial agriculture began. The soil that once acted as a carbon bank now acts as a carbon source. Then the water. Soil rich in organic matter absorbs water like a sponge. Soil depleted of organic matter sheds water like concrete. During heavy rains, depleted soil floods. During droughts, depleted soil bakes. Farmers compensate with irrigation, pumping fossil water from aquifers that are not recharging. The Ogallala Aquifer, which underlies much of the Great Plains breadbasket, is dropping by more than a foot per year in some regions. When it empties, nothing will replace it. And the nutrients themselves. Synthetic fertilizer provides nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. 3 elements. But plants need at least 17 elements for optimal health. Healthy soil, soil alive with microorganisms, provides all of them. Depleted soil provides only what you add. Crops grown in depleted soil are measurably less nutritious than crops grown in healthy soil. Studies have documented declining mineral content in vegetables over the past 70 years. Your grandmother's tomato contained more nutrition than yours, not because the variety changed, because the soil changed. The irony is brutal. Industrial agriculture promised higher yields, and for decades it delivered them. But those yields came by mining the soil, not building it. We have been eating the seed corn, spending the principal instead of living on the interest. And now the bills are coming due. But the knowledge survived. Not in laboratories, not in extension bulletins, not in agricultural colleges. It survived in the margins, in the memories of stubborn grandparents who refused to stop composting, in immigrant communities that carried old world practices to new world gardens, in the deliberately preserved seed lines of organizations like Seed Savers Exchange, in the quietly persistent root cellars of families who never stopped using them. In 1975, Diane Ott Wheely and Kent Wheely founded the Seed Savers Exchange with a simple mission: prevent the extinction of heirloom vegetable varieties. They began with those Bavarian seeds from Diane's grandfather. By 2000, the organization maintained over 20,000 varieties, many saved by families who had grown them for generations. These were varieties the commercial seed industry had abandoned because they could not be patented, could not be hybridized, could not generate recurring revenue. Each variety in that collection carries survival information. These are not ornamental curiosities. They are proven performers, selected over decades or centuries for disease resistance, drought tolerance, storage quality, and flavor. These varieties still remember how to thrive without chemical support because they never learned to depend on it. The modern organic farming movement built on this foundation. When Robert Rodale began publishing Organic Gardening magazine in the 1940s, he was not inventing new techniques. He was preserving old ones. When permaculture pioneers Bill Mollison and David Holmgren codified design principles in the 1970s, they were systematizing what traditional cultures had known for millennia. The knowledge was not created. It was remembered. And now, the remembering is accelerating. Community gardens are returning to American cities. Detroit, which led relief garden programs in the 1930s, now hosts over 1,500 community gardens and urban farms. Farmers' markets have grown from fewer than 2,000 in 1994 to more than 9,000 today. Seed libraries operate in public libraries across the country, allowing patrons to check out seeds the way they check out books. The USDA, which spent decades promoting chemical agriculture, has begun shifting its message. The Conservation Stewardship Program now includes support for cover cropping, reduced tillage, and organic matter building. soil health has become a policy priority for the first time since the Dust Bowl. Researchers who study soil biology are finally receiving funding to quantify what Depression-era gardeners knew through observation. Living soil outperforms dead soil by every measure that matters. The research confirms what the old-timers always said. Studies on compost application show yield increases of 20 to 50% compared to chemical fertilizer alone. Studies on cover cropping show soil organic matter increases 1 percentage point per decade, translating to significantly improved water retention and nutrient cycling. Studies on no-till farming show reduced erosion, increased carbon storage, and improved profitability once the transition period ends. The mechanisms are now understood scientifically. When you add compost, you are inoculating soil with beneficial microorganisms. Those organisms form relationships with plant roots that chemistry cannot replicate. Mycorrhizal fungi, for example, extend root systems by factors of 10 to 100, accessing phosphorus that roots alone cannot reach. Chemical phosphorus fertilizer actually suppresses mycorrhizal colonization. The more phosphorus you add artificially, the less the fungi help, and the more phosphorus you need to add. A dependency spiral is built into the chemistry. When you maintain soil cover, you are protecting the habitat that soil organisms require. Bare soil heats up, dries out, and kills the microbes that make nutrients available. Covered soil stays cool, retains moisture, and supports thriving biological communities. The difference is visible. Healthy soil looks like chocolate cake, dark, crumbly, and smelling of earth. Depleted soil looks like dust, pale, compacted, and lifeless. When you save seed from your own garden, you are selecting for local adaptation. Commercial seed is bred for average conditions across broad regions. Your saved seed is bred for your exact conditions. 10 years of selection in your specific microclimate produces varieties that outperform commercial alternatives in your specific location. This is not theory. It is documented. The research catches up to the practice. Everything Depression-era gardeners knew through observation, modern science confirms through measurement. The old ways work. They work better than the chemical ways across nearly every metric, except one: convenience for industry. The question is whether we will remember in time. Climate change is stressing agricultural systems worldwide. Droughts are intensifying. Heat waves are breaking records. Rainfall patterns are shifting in ways that existing infrastructure cannot accommodate. The stable conditions that industrial agriculture assumed are no longer stable. In this context, the resilience strategies of Depression-era farmers take on new urgency. Their methods were designed for chaos, for years when the rain does not come, for years when the heat does not break, for years when the economy collapses and you cannot buy inputs at any price. They learned to build fertility that does not require purchase, to store harvests that do not require electricity, to maintain seeds that do not require corporate permission. This knowledge is not nostalgic. It is practical. A family that knows how to compost, how to save seed, how to build a root cellar, how to grow for storage, has options that other families do not. When supply chains break, they eat from their gardens. When prices spike, they draw from their stored food. When commercial varieties fail, they plant their own saved seed. They have resilience built into their household economy. The same principles apply at larger scales. Farms that build soil organic matter recover faster from drought than farms that depend on irrigation. Farms that maintain diverse rotations suffer fewer pest outbreaks than farms locked into monoculture. Farms that cycle nutrients biologically spend less money on inputs than farms that purchase all fertility. The economics of resilience favor the old methods, not the new ones. So let us be specific about what can be recovered. Composting requires nothing but space and patience. Layer kitchen scraps with dried leaves. Keep it moist. Turn it occasionally. In 2 to 6 months, you have free fertility that the chemical industry charges billions to replace. Apply it 1 to 2 inches thick each spring. Within 3 years, your soil transforms. Root cellaring requires only access to the Earth's stable temperature. A hillside dugout, a buried barrel, even an insulated corner of an unheated garage can work. Potatoes last 6 months. Carrots in sand last 4 months. Cabbages wrapped in newspaper survive until March. The key is choosing storage varieties, heirloom types bred before refrigeration, genetics that encode survival instead of supermarket appearance. Seed saving begins with easy crops, tomatoes, peppers, beans, peas. Let fruits ripen fully, collect the seeds, dry them, store them cool. Plant them next spring. Each generation adapts more perfectly to your specific soil, your specific climate, your specific conditions. Trade with neighbors. Join local exchanges. The network strengthens everyone involved. Soil building extends beyond compost to cover crops and rotation. Winter rye and crimson clover planted in fall prevent erosion and add fertility by spring. Mulch between plants retains moisture and slowly decomposes into humus. Rotation prevents depletion and breaks pest cycles. These are not complex techniques. They are patterns that sustained agriculture for 10,000 years before the chemical revolution convinced us to forget them. Each practice reinforces the others. Compost feeds soil biology. Healthy soil grows healthy plants. Healthy plants produce viable seed. Saved seed adapts to local conditions. The system closes into a loop that requires no external input, no purchase, no permission, no dependence. The fertilizer industry is worth over $200 billion globally. That wealth depends on farmers and gardeners believing they need to purchase fertility. Every family that learns to compost represents lost revenue. Every garden that builds soil organically represents a customer who stopped buying. Every seed saved is a seed not sold. This is not conspiracy. It is arithmetic. Industries protect their markets. When free alternatives threaten paid products, industries invest in messaging that favors the paid option. They fund research that emphasizes the benefits of their products. They sponsor educational materials that normalize purchasing. They shape the conversation so thoroughly that most people cannot imagine an alternative. But the alternatives exist. They always existed. Depression-era families did not have access to $200 billion of marketing. They had access to observation, experience, and necessity. They learned that soil could feed itself if you fed it first. They learned that harvest could last all winter if you stored it properly. They learned that seed could perpetuate itself if you saved it carefully. This knowledge was not secret. It was deliberately forgotten. And now it can be deliberately remembered. You can grow what they silenced. Not a plant this time, but a practice. An entire system of practices that makes gardeners independent of industries that profit from their dependence. Start small. Build a compost pile this spring. Save tomato seeds this summer. Build a simple root cellar this fall. Each step teaches the next. Each season deepens your skill. Within 3 years, you will have soil that needs no purchased fertility, seeds that need no catalog order, and harvest that needs no continuous refrigeration. The Depression-era families who survived did not have special knowledge. They had remembered knowledge. Knowledge that had sustained humanity for 10,000 years before the chemical revolution. Knowledge that the fertilizer industry spent 90 years teaching you to forget. But forgetting is not permanent. The knowledge lives in books, in seed banks, in the memories of elders, in the soil itself waiting to be fed again. Every gardener who learns this knowledge becomes a node in a network. Every seed saved is a seed that escapes the market. Every compost pile is a middle finger to the fertilizer industry. In 1933, 20 million American families proved that food security does not require corporate permission. They proved that abundance can be built, not bought. They proved that the ground beneath our feet holds more fertility than all the factories in the world, if we remember how to unlock it. The factories wanted you to forget. The factories needed you to forget. But you are listening now, and the listening is the first step toward remembering. Plant soil that feeds itself. Store harvest that lasts through winter. Save seeds that return every spring without purchase. Join a network of gardeners sharing knowledge that industries cannot control. Become harder to sell to. Become harder to starve. The Depression-era families left us a blueprint, not in books, though books exist. In practice, in the soil of community gardens, in the seed collections of stubborn preservers, in the root cellars that never stopped working. The knowledge survives because some people never stopped using it. Now you know what they know, what your great-grandparents knew, what 20 million American families discovered when the economy collapsed, and the only option was to remember. The next seed breaks free soon.